Hello everyone. I recently made a video looking at a NORTHEAST Airsoft Sten Mk V, which went down very well. I certainly am very pleased with the number of views that got, and hopefully it's been of use to people in assessing that for their own needs. I reviewed it from a reenactor's point of view, and the idea of this follow-up video is to actually compare it to an original Mark V Sten, which my friend has very kindly lent me, a deactivated example of course, and just have a look at the comparison of the external details and how they look side by side, and the comparison that can be drawn between them. So without further ado, we'll get into the main part of the video and have a look at these two compared.
So here they are. We have the NORTHEAST Airsoft Mark V in the foreground here, and to the rear the original deactivated example, and we're going to compare these. I think you would have to admit from the initial comparison here, just looking at the two of them next to each other, the comparison is favourable. The NORTHEAST Airsoft example does look very good, even when compared directly to an original. I've removed the magazines from these to make them a little bit more manoeuvrable in terms of bringing them up to the camera and having a look at the variations and so forth. We'll start at the muzzle end and work towards the stock, and if we bring these up towards the camera here, bring up the muzzle specifically to compare, you can see there is a variation here in the shape of the barrel, and the length is actually slightly different as well, which is a little difficult to work out in camera with them being slightly further away. But I believe, my understanding of the Sten Mk V is correct, which is limited. I'll be honest, I'm certainly not an expert on the Mk V. This is within the manufacturing variations you see in existing real Mk Vs. This deactivated example just has a slightly different size of barrel nut, and therefore you've got less of the you've got more of the thicker section of the barrel here exposed on this example. The barrel nuts do vary. As you can see here, the design of the barrel nut, in terms of the holes that are worked in, is quite different. That's another thing to note. Here is the barrel nuts do differ between these two. This example has the 3 holes along the top here, and then 3 holes on each down here and along here, so 3 sets of 3 holes around the exterior. This has sets of holes around the end here, and then there are a few around the end underneath the bracket which holds on the front pistol grip. Again, that's a manufacturing variation between certain types of Mark V. It's a manufacturing variation you do see in originals. But obviously, in terms of the overall look, the comparison of the two of them here, very good. We'll move a bit further back now and talk about, obviously, the mounting point for the pistol grip. You can see it's consistent across the two. It's a simple metal band. The pistol grips are just very slightly differently shaped. This one obviously slightly more rounded at the base here compared to this. Again, I believe that's within the scope of manufacturing variations you see in Mark Vs. The profile of the ejection port and everything is correct. That's directly comparable. And if we lift this up here, we'll have a look at the top of the magazine well. Now the stampings vary slightly as well, but you can see all the features here are very nicely copied across. The magazine, the magazine release catch is the same, and then obviously the plunger here, the little pin that locks the magazine well in place, is also nicely reproduced there. If we bring that up into frame a little better there, you can see. So they compare very favourably. Move these forward now. The profile on the cocking handle is nicely recreated, and obviously, as we've talked about before, the function of this gas-operated airsoft gun is essentially the same as a real Mark V Sten, well, the same as a real Sten, which means that obviously the action and everything is essentially the same. And you can see this is all nicely mirrored across between the two. The cutout in the rear of the receiver there, in order to lock the cocking handle back. We'll of course flip these over in a minute and have a look at the other side as well. Moving down here, look at the fire selector and all the details down here, quite nicely reproduced. There are some minor variations in the length of this here, this pin, and obviously the marking on the fire selector itself, but nicely recreated, as you can see. They compare very favourably against each other. Similarly with the back sight, we move these forward again. The rear section of the receiver there is nicely recreated in terms of the overall shape, and obviously the back sight is a very simple aperture and the post on the back of the receiver there. nicely recreated. The trigger guard is the same profile, very nicely done. Trigger is the correct shape, and that carries across quite nicely. One thing I've noticed is that the rear pistol grip on the reproduction is quite a bit thinner than the one on the original, but the profile is pretty much there, so they compare favourably as well. And then the butt, we'll bring these both into shot here. The butt compares brilliantly. I'm very impressed with, as I said, when looking at this originally, the fact this has a proper brass butt plate, as we'll see in a moment, with the trap and everything in it. The mounting point for the sling swivel on top there is very nicely recreated, as you can see. I'll bring those forward again so you can see that more clearly. Very nicely reproduced there. Prior to turning these right round, we'll have a quick comparison of the butt plates here, if the camera will come into focus. And you can see obviously the one on the right here, which is the original, is a bit dull and battered compared to the one on the reproduction for the airsoft gun. But again, very nicely reproduced. The detail, the attention to detail is superb in the recreation there. We'll compare the other side now, and if we bring these in so we can look at the muzzle end of each one again, you can see here, big flat-headed retaining screw there, the end of the plunger for the pin that secures the magazine well in place, and obviously the profile of the magazine well there. And if we compare the airsoft gun, you can see again flathead screw there, details of the plunger there, not quite the same but a good representation of it, and then obviously the shape of the magazine well is correct, so that's nicely done there. If we look at the side here again with the fire selector, you can see nicely reproduced. The way the receiver is attached onto the trigger group and everything down here is nicely done, nicely reproduced. Obviously the pin for the trigger there, and you've got the cocking handle protruding through the receiver there. Obviously this functions in exactly the same way as said in the previous video. Move this up here just to give you a view of the side of the butt there. Again, the profile and everything looks very good. It's a very good reproduction. Have a look at the magazines here. Now we actually have a slightly different version of a Sten magazine here, but obviously it's slightly different lip there where it fits into the magazine well, but this is not inaccurate, it's just a slightly different design. You can see though the features that have been copied across. If I flip this over the right way, there's little holes down the rear there, which obviously show you the number of rounds you have left, as you can see. And the front profile there, you can see that the airsoft magazine is just slightly wider, but not noticeably. And then obviously the butt plate here, you have the filling point for the gas, essentially in this point where this little rivet is, as you can see there. So the magazine, not directly comparable to this one, but it is a good representation of a Sten gun magazine. Done a good job with that. I say it's heavy because, as was pointed out in the previous video, this contains the gas reservoir as well as carrying the BBs, the ammunition. So that's the magazines. One final thing to talk about here, the original Mark V Sten will take both the number 4 spike bayonet, as you can see there, and the number 9 bayonet, as you can see. So it will take both quite happily, as it should. The lugs should accommodate both. As already shown, the reproduction, the airsoft example, will take the number 4 bayonet in exactly the way it should, the spike bayonet. But for some reason, well, I think it's because the lugs are just slightly too big, it won't fit my original number 9 bayonet for some reason. I'm not entirely sure why. I think where I've tried to put this on, you can see it's taken some of the paint off the lugs there on the front of the muzzle, on the end of the barrel there where the lugs are for the bayonet. So I think the lugs are just slightly the wrong profile to take this particular number 9 bayonet. You may have better luck with yours, so that might need a little bit of remedial work, although it's not really necessary. Obviously fixing bayonets is going to be a very rare occurrence, but I thought that was worth pointing out. This won't actually fix my number 9 bayonet. It's perhaps a tolerance with this particular bayonet, but it will fit on the original, interestingly. So that's a difference between the two. So there we are. Hopefully this comparison I hope this comparison has been of use, and certainly I've been very impressed comparing it directly to an original Sten. The Airsoft example does hold up very well, and I'm very impressed once again, as I was in the initial review of this. So there it is.
Hopefully it's been of interest and of use to you. If you enjoyed this video and would like to see more of this sort of thing, please do consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. And whether you're newly subscribing or you've previously subscribed, please do make sure you hit the little bell, little notification button down below. That will of course alert you when I upload future videos. If you really like my uploads and you would like to support the channel, you can. Patreon and PayPal are both linked down below. And as ever, a huge thank you to all of my supporters over there. It's very much appreciated. Thank you all very much indeed. If you'd like to follow the channel on social media, you can. Facebook, Instagram and Twitter are all linked down below. And if you'd like to get in touch but you don't really use social media, there is of course an email address down there as well. That's everything for this video. So until next time, bye for now.